Okay, so recently I was doing some sleuthing and came across something really cool. I believe I have found some used and unused concept art for American Horror Story Apocalypse. This artwork is by Jeff Mosa, who is a production designer for American Horror Story Cult, as well as Scream Queens, 911, and of course American Horror Story Apocalypse. The spelling of his name is on the screen because I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but I'm just going to be calling him Jeff Mosa from now on. Basically, a production designer's job is to visualize and illustrate what is in the script in terms of sets and stuff like that. So a part of this job is creating concept art of potential sets that may or may not end up being constructed for the show. So this is basically what Jeff Mosa does. For American Horror Story Apocalypse, the production schedule was extremely tight, and there was a bit of confusion regarding production design. Jeff Mosa, whose artwork we will be focusing on in this video, was signed on as production designer first and majorly designed Outpost 3 / the Hawthorne School as we know it, likely due to scheduling conflicts given that 911 was also in production at the time, which Mosa also serves as production designer for. Jeff Mosa did not serve as production designer past pre-production of Apocalypse. For episode 1, Giles Masters served as production designer, and it's unclear what exactly he designed, but I would assume that he did more of the non-Outpost sets like Evie's Mansion and all that from the first episode. Then for the remaining 9 episodes, Val Wiltz served as production designer. He actually wrote a really interesting article about his experience serving as production designer for Apocalypse. I could make a whole video detailing that, but I'll just put the link to that article in the description. Here's a little slideshow of Val Wiltz' designs for Apocalypse for those of you who are interested. Usually Jeff Mosa's artwork is pretty close to what actually ends up in the shows. For example, here's a few concept arts he did for Scream Queen Season 2 that ended up being used. However, along with some used concepts that I found for American Horror Story Apocalypse, there are a lot of unused concepts. So there are some pieces in here that would have changed the entire look and feel of Apocalypse, for better or for worse. Now keep in mind, I'm not 100% sure that this artwork was intended for Apocalypse, however, many of these images are very similar to what actually did end up in the show, but there are some notable outliers, but you can make your own conclusion yourself, but I have very good reason to believe that these were intended for Apocalypse. Let's begin with the concepts that did make it into Apocalypse. First off, we have his concept for the dining room. To me, this artwork was undoubtedly intended for Apocalypse. The actual set is clearly inspired by this concept art. Next, we have the staircase at Outpost 3, which the real set does deviate a bit more from this one, but you can definitely see how the concept art inspired the real set. Next, we have a sort of library room with an almost catwalk-like second level, which was definitely incorporated into the larger shared living spaces and hallways at Outpost 3. The next piece was likely for the shared room where the group convened in the earlier episodes. This is kind of where the artwork begins to deviate a bit from the final product. However, you can still tell that this is a room that would make sense in Outpost 3 as we know it. These next few pieces are where the artwork becomes completely different from the final product. The reasons for why these concepts did not pan out is likely due to budget. We can see that Mosa and production initially had a much grander idea for the exterior of Outpost 3, a concept that would likely cost a lot more money than the little spiral sculpture that we ended up getting. So this is what I believe to be one of Jeff Mosa's concepts for the exterior of Outpost 3. There's a few different sketches and variations of this design, but overall it's generally the same concept. You can see that the building is more of a grand, militant, almost Star Wars-like building. This is a really unique structure in terms of American Horror Story, and I think it could have helped the Outpost parts of the season stand out from the Coven and Murder House portion. Because one of the things to me that has lacked in terms of Season 7 and Season 8 is a iconic building. You know, Season 1 had the Murder House, Season 2 had Briarcliff, Season 3 had Robichaux's Academy, Season 4 had the fairgrounds, sort of, the big demon archway sculpture thing, and Season 5 obviously had the hotel, and Season 6 Roanoke House. Season 7, you can argue that the Mayfair Richard house is the equivalent, but it definitely is nowhere near like icon status as the other ones to me, and that's basically because it's just a normal house, despite its Hollywood history and all that. And then Apocalypse just has that spiral sculpture of Outpost 3, which to me was alright, but definitely not iconic. But I think this concept for Outpost 3 is really unique and cool, and I would love to see how it would have looked on screen. Jeff Mosa also had another larger concept for the exterior of Outpost 3 that I'll get into at the end of the video, but right now, let's look at some more grand interiors that were not used for Outpost 3, likely due to budget again. This one in particular, you can tell its general layout was used for the show, just not quite on a large scale like the drawing shows. This next one is what I believe to be a concept for the chemical showers from when someone comes from the outside into the outpost. It's not too far off from what we got, but again, a little more grand and on a larger scale. Same thing goes for this room, which I believe is supposed to be the room where Michael Langdon gave his interviews for who would join him to the next outpost. And then here's just some other pieces of concept art that I found. Nothing too notable about them, but I figured you should see it too. And last but not least, it seems as though there was a third option for the exterior of Outpost 3, this one being more of a castle-esque building. It kind of reminds me of the Xavier School from X-Men, but it's definitely more of a mansion vibe than the other ones. This one I can see fitting into the world of American Horror Story a bit better than the one I showed you earlier, mostly because it's looks like a normal building that you would find, which is kind of the same for all the other iconic buildings in American Horror Story, whereas the other concept that I showed you does not necessarily scream an American Horror Story building to me. But of course, concept art does not always equal how it would have looked on screen, so it's hard to know for sure which one I would have preferred. But Jeff Mosa included a pre-apocalypse version and a post-apocalypse version of this building, likely for the flashback scenes to when Outpost 3 was the Hawthorne School. And like I said, I don't know 100% that these were for Apocalypse, but given that he is a production designer on Apocalypse, and these are recent artworks of his, I think it's far from a coincidence that he includes both a pre-apocalypse and a post-apocalypse version of these buildings. Alright, so that's all that I found. I just thought I would share my discovery with you guys and make a little short video to hold you over for the next one. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want me to do more things where I go into concept art and see how it differs from what actually ended up in the seasons, please let me know in the comments. And yeah, I thought these were really cool and fun to think of what could have been if production decided to go with some of these concepts. So let me know in the comments below if you would have preferred some of these alternate sets, or do you like what we got? And also don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at RyanMurphyVerse if you feel like it, and I'll see you next time.